So the stationary sources will have to start reporting next year, is that right?
January 1st.
When will you start imposing rules? Will you fast-track rules to make stationary sources actually cut their emissions? What's the schedule for rules to cut their emissions?
Yeah, I don't have a schedule for additional rules with respect to the Clean Air Act for stationary sources. We have proposed a rule that talks about how we believe the Clean Air Act would apply to stationary sources. That's the so-called tailing rule.
Do you have a plan to fast-track these rules?
No. We have a plan to continue working, and we will indeed. This is certainly not an ending. We will continue to work under the Clean Air Act because that's what we must now legally do. With respect to this finding, we are compelled to address greenhouse gas pollution.
And just to follow up on that, you say you want to compliment what Congress is doing, but the Senate leadership has indicated they don't plan to get around to a vote on a climate change bill until early spring, which is late March, early April, according to the calendar. So is it possible that EPA could issue these rules before they get around to voting on a climate change bill?
Well, I certainly have heard the leadership in the Senate say that they do intend to move to those to legislation. We see very promising engagement by a number of senators. When, for example, when they turn to those rules, they'll have the benefit of an emissions reporting inventory that's now set in rules that EPA has already adopted because we did that under different authority.
But you will wait in the Senate to act.
No, this is not an either or. I have not laid out a timeline, and certainly I respect and will make sure that we are watching and working with Congress in their legislative efforts. So they are independent in timeline. We don't have a timeline that looks at the Senate, but I certainly hope to see them move quickly.
Administrator, we have a couple of questions on the phone. Operator, if you could open up the line really quick to take a couple of questions.
So we need the best available technology.
Okay, while we wait on that, we'll take another question from the audience.
Getting back to the issue of the academia, some of them seem to show the scientists discussing carbon about others maybe appear to show using data. Is there any idea of any cause or any reason to be examining the underlying data?
The vast body of scientific evidence not only remains unassailable, it's grown stronger. And it only points to one conclusion, that greenhouse gases from human activity are increasing at unprecedented rates and are affecting our environment and threatening our health. The findings I make today are firmly grounded in science that comes from independent lines of evidence, including by United States scientists. And all that work has been publicly commented on to varying degrees. And if you need one more point of certainty, it's that critics who have been opposing climate change and scientists who disagree, whether they oppose climate change policy or not with scientific findings, commented during the public comment period. EPA received almost 400,000 comments, and many of them were from scientists who brought up their scientific arguments. All of that material is in the record. All of it has been responded to in making this finding, and that's why I stand here certain that the science has been thoroughly evaluated, that the underlying scientists, both in those emails and the vast body that isn't addressed in any one of those emails, remains the same. As I said, we have to continually look at the science.
To what extent does the CRU, the underlying data, I mean?
Well, the CRU underlying data, and first off, there's lots of data from the CRU, and then there is a data set that's now the subject to some of these, the subject of some of these emails. But then there are several other data sets that have been evaluated by hundreds of scientists. And all that work is in thousands of different articles, all that have been peer-reviewed. So you're talking about one tiny thread out of thousands of thread of evidence and data and scientific information that lead me to stand here today confident that there was no reason to delay. And in fact, we could move forward with work that we have been planning.
Okay, we're going to try one last question from the phone. Are we ready on the phone?
Your question comes from the line of Steve Power with the Wall Street Journal. Hi, Administrator. Thanks for doing this call. I'll have a two-part question. I know you say that you are not putting out a timeline for next rules on emissions, but could you just give an idea of when you think the earliest would be that the EPA could propose rules covering CO2 from existing power plants? And secondly, could you clarify why it is that you're issuing this rule now as opposed to doing it concurrent with the vehicle rule? Because I'm told that this is the first time EPA has issued an endangerment finding separate from the rule to actually regulate the pollutant.
Yeah, the answer to your first question is that no, I have no additional information on timeline, Steve. And the second question is yes, this is different. This was the subject. This finding itself was the subject of a U.S. Supreme Court case. There has been much written, and in fact, earlier this year, EPA released the endangerment finding that was put together under the Bush administration, sent over to the White House, and never opened. In my mind, in order to show the American people that EPA is on the job, is about doing its job, it was important for our credibility and for the trust of the American people to know that we would put this information out for public comment and act on it in an expeditious fashion. We would keep the ball moving, and it's my hope that the ball being moving, as it moves to Congress, they'll keep pace on the ball, as I've heard others say.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.